Not even King Kapisi could draw much of a crowd. Another musician did online. Sir Dave Dobbin copped flack for standing up for anti-vaxxers. While he's double-vaxxed, he doesn't like the unkindness directed at those who haven't been.
Thousands of protesters descended on Parliament today with a range of messages for the Prime Minister about vaccines, mandates and lockdowns.
Although some of the messaging was inconsistent, it was delivered en masse.
Anti-vaxxers, people against mandates for vaccines, those who oppose lockdowns, the government and the media, and even Trump flags.
Both networks state that it wasn't just a vaccination thing. A lot of people seemed to think it was.
Get vaccinated, you dipshit.
This is very much an anti-vaccination protest.
Pretty ridiculous. Everyone should just go out and get vaccinated.
Newshub's bizarrely worded intro may not have helped with the subsequent confusion.
As a group, they were louder than they were large, and boy, those anti-vaccination protesters were loud, as thousands of them marched through the capital.
It was one of the biggest police operations Parliament's seen.
The mood here is electric. You can feel their anger and frustration.
But with that anger and that susceptibility to misinformation that could put their families at risk, there ultimately was just a kind of a feeling of sadness here today.
Not everyone seemed sad. Okay, there's a whole lot of emphasis on disinformation or misinformation.
COVID-19 misinformation has dramatically increased.
People stuck at home are being bombarded with misinformation.
Research out today says misinformation about COVID-19 is becoming more violent, extreme, misogynistic and racist.
Anti-Māori racism, a lot of Islamophobia, and we're also seeing white supremacist imagery being used in its entirety. Indications that the government or the state are similar to the Nazi regime, to apartheid, to a Stalinist or communist regime.
News doesn't get too specific about what the disinformation actually is. So we're not too sure what we're not meant to believe.
That disinformation is increasingly violent, trans and homophobic, racist and vulgar.
Everything is conflated without it really being spelled out. Who is being accused of what? One could, willfully or not, misinterpret these signs in the crowd. Going along with the general vibe of the reporting, a viewer might think that these are the people promoting the bad stuff on that list, even though I think evidence provided only shows the protesters being against it, in fact accusing the government of doing it. Of it. Some commentators appear to deliberately misinform by promoting that analysis of the situation.
There's no place in this world, there's no place in Aotearoa for the Tino Rangatira flag being flown next to flags and symbols that promote white supremacy. I have no time for that whatsoever.
He's either being sneaky or the white supremacist stuff he's referring to as those Trump flags, but that is not the mug of somebody who has a problem with mega wealthy womanizers who oppose communism and believe in tax cuts. To trivialize apartheid or genocide would be insensitive to a lot of people, but it's not new. I think people may sometimes turn a blind eye depending on what their political allegiances are.
It is apartheid, and I would say genocide.
This whole thing's always been common. At this stage, some references you can't imagine that they're completely appropriate, but more broadly, when it comes to accusing governments of authoritarian behaviour, I think the shark has well and truly been jumped in that regard. I remember former PM John Key often being called a Nazi, problematic for at least one reason, but despot comparisons have been socially and morally acceptable for a long time now.
Bush is a Nazi.
Should one be able to switch on and off that propensity for outrage, depending on contemporary politicians you like or dislike?
Discussion of Nazis or Stalinist regimes may create a sense of anxiety and fear.
As for using rhetoric that might make some people feel anxious, pretty standard too. This here is how the world is sometimes presented on New Zealand television.
He is trying to stoke a race war. He really is. And on the radio stations of his supporters and on the, on Fox News, there are discussions. His supporters are waiting to engage in the next civil war.
Then instead of going, holy crap, that's a worry, the journalist just carries on like it's no big deal. Graphics here remind me of a museum. Not that you're going to learn anything here.
Jacinda Ardern says she's seen increased anger at her online.
A lot of the vitriol from anti-vaxxers is directed at Jacinda Ardern.
Is misinformation criticism of the PM? That is the only thing they mention. Interestingly, maybe, the Justice Minister can't definitively answer this question.
If I write an opinion piece that says Jacinda Ardern is a communist or a dictator,
media, could I be stung for hate speech?
Well, let's not use that. Let's use something else theoretical.
So I can write that opinion piece and not...
You've got the freedom to express that both as media, but your intent might not be to incite hatred against us.
And who decides what my intent was?
Well, that would be the police.
So maybe some people could indeed feel legitimately a bit unhappy about the direction society might be going in.
The popularity of her Facebook Lives polled using taxpayer money.
Evening, everyone.
COVID and vaccine messaging, but also highlights messages like such great leadership and so great to have you as our leader.
There's been a surge in divisive social media activity since the government's latest COVID strategy announcement, deepening the divide between the vaccinated and unvaccinated.
And every time there's a big government announcement...
If you want summer, if you want to go to bars and restaurants, get vaccinated.
The rhetoric heats up.
Someone who is an authoritarian and someone that has tendencies, that's not necessarily the same thing, of course.
Ardern personally instructed media not to ask about Ihu Matau. Her office even threatened to restrict access to the Prime Minister for the rest of the trip if we did.
We made it a priority to establish a public interest journalism fund to help our media continue to produce stories that keep New Zealanders informed.
Over the years, though, we have caught the odd unfiltered moment that might make a classical liberal blush.
Comrades, then and only then will we win the war.
We're here and you're over there. Hate speech. When you see it, you know it. We're in government and you're not. And I'm quite proud of that. I totally
that of the general population.
I'm going to answer the questions of the accredited media.
You can't reject those numbers. You cannot reject those numbers.
I've answered the question. We will continue to be your single source of truth. I absolutely reject that.
We passed a law.
I did a little dance.
Could well argue that's not quite the same.
I actually believe that it is possible to exist in politics without lying.
Many people took note of this particular quote.
You basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so yep.
We're seeing increasingly separatist and divisive language being pushed at people around this idea of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated.
Of course, nobody should mistake her for being anti-vaccination. I think she's just saying that people should be nicer or could be nicer.
Some people have decided not to take the vaccination, and that's purely their prerogative, and they can do that. But let's not be judgmental. Let's not cast people out and go back to the old Bible days where the leper was made to sit outside the city. So let's work through this cautiously, take a slow approach, because otherwise we'll get too judgmental and we'll fall into what I'm starting to see on social media, which is, well, too bad, they should be ostracized. That's not the Pacific way.
I don't think too many other community leaders seem to be discouraging the shunning and vilifying of those who haven't been vaccinated, or even just people who oppose mandates, even if the person's reason for that is ultimately unknown. And not just them vilified, anyone who hints at tolerance for them.
Even Sir Dave Dobbin dragged into the social media storm after he questioned vaccine mandates, clarifying his position today, though, as being pro-vaccination.
But
he doesn't like the unkindness directed at those who haven't been.
I think it's been made clear that he needs to keep his mouth shut and stay out of public life for a while. I think a few days after that, sailor Russell Cootes got in trouble for, I think, saying something ultimately paraphrased as calling the government dictatorial. If I were to expand on that, I think he was maybe saying that even though this country could celebrate its deaths per capita, for some reason the people living in other places, life seemed to be sort of so much better somehow. It's weird.
Alright, recess is over. Let's go.
Well, he got the backlash. And I think he got it a little bit worse than Dobbin, arse ass and all. Because after winning a couple of World Cups, he went overseas to play for another team and make more money. And you're not meant to do that unless you play any other sport, whereas Dave, to his credit, always remained loyal.
Well, I lost friends over this, and it's just silly, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to accept those people back in my life.
But with tensions high, a call for restraint.
Be kind and thoughtful to those people who are still unable to make that decision yet. And also remember that there are some people who are not going to choose to get vaccinated, and they are still part of our whānau.
I can be cynical sometimes.
You can be strong and you can be kind.
I always thought that kind stuff was superficial and gimmicky. Hers, not hers.
So we're building what I'd like to believe is a really compassionate government.
Liar! Did you tell everybody to not get vaccinated?
Absolutely not. What has upset me more than what media may have said about me is the bullying, the nastiness. Too many patients say that they had taken the jab against their will, faced with the threat of jab or job, they reluctantly rolled up their sleeve. This community has a strong history of being bullied. They know when they are being bullied and they don't like it.
Tricky one, huh?
Here's your AIDS ribbon.
No thanks.
You don't want to wear an AIDS ribbon?
No.
But you have to wear an AIDS ribbon.
I have to?
Yes.
Yeah, see, that's why I don't want to.
I think for some people, not that they'd want to necessarily share it, their reasons for whatever can be more complicated than they might let on.
But everyone wears the ribbon. You must wear the ribbon.
You're a ribbon bully.
Come back here! Come back here and put this on!
Hey, where's your ribbon? Oh, I don't wear the ribbon.
You don't wear the ribbon?
Who do you think you are?
Put the ribbon on.
This guy won't wear a ribbon.
Who? Who doesn't want to wear the ribbon?
I've recently been a little bit cavalier maybe with the use of the phrase conspiracy theorist. It wasn't so apparent to me that labeling someone a conspiracy theorist is now a sort of common way to discredit, I think, an increasingly wide range of other unwelcome opinions. The lines have gotten more and more blurry too. If one has an unpopular opinion, that person must surely also think that shape-shifting lizard people walk among us.
We saw Jerry Brownlee send out a bit of a dog whistle, inferring that there was a conspiracy, that there was a lack of transparency.
He is playing again to the emotions of a constituency that he possibly sees as a national vote as well.
He didn't do much other than let out a coy chortle. And arguably there was precedent to be inquisitive, because a few months earlier a leaked memo did indicate that the government did occasionally in their communications consider political expediency. There was this article in 2020 about fake news, misinformation, alarming that so many people are falling for it. Foremost above theories they used to make their point, the idea that the virus came from a laboratory. I get the feeling it's the type of thing that never will be proven whether it was or not. But the idea is definitely gaining mainstream traction.
You mean like perhaps there's a chance that this was created in a lab, there's an investigation?
A chance?
Well, but
oh my
if there
God.
is evidence, I'd love to hear it.
There's
I just don't know.
a novel respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan novel respiratory coronavirus lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's just a little too weird, don't you think?
Yes, so will you, in this country, have sanctions against people who don't take or aren't vaccinated against COVID?
No, we haven't done that, because actually when you look at the levels of vaccination we managed to reach in New Zealand, they are high. I see no reason to do that. We get up well over 90% for our vaccinations without that, and I believe we will for this.
Both yourself and Minister Hipkins said that the vaccinations would never be forced on anyone, and yet the mandates have come.
So that was the question over whether or not we would compel all New Zealanders to be vaccinated, and we've firmly taken that view. We will not.
This educator outraged at the vaccination mandate.
From the 15th, my job is gone.
Do you acknowledge that by appearing to sort of flip-flop on that issue, though, it has given the anti-vaxxing movement something to work with?
My job is gone because I choose personally not to have the vaccine.
We are at a stage in the vaccine rollout where we are trying to reach into communities that may hold firm views.
You mean the brown people? Is that what you mean?
Now we're getting to a smaller group of people who have a whole range of trust issues, and it gets much harder.
I'm fighting for my kids. All of Ngāpuhi does not agree with this. We will never cede our sovereignty. Under he whakaputanga, you have no authority over us to make laws over us.
But we need to have those conversations.
Just not with the protesters today. She slipped out the back.
I don't block the people that come up with conspiracy theories. I try to discuss with them to see the futility in the information or the disinformation that they're spreading.
What's so sad is that they said all these positive things. You got to bear with me here, though.
So, for example, Billy TK put out some disinformation that...
Okay, compartmentalise that bit. Bill Gates, whatever. This next part is important.
It only took me 10 minutes on my phone to find out that it was disinformation that was being spread by Candace Owens, who's someone who actually wants African-American people to go back into slavery.
I had a vague awareness of Candace Owens, a conservative author and commentator. From what I saw before this,
Candace Owens wants African-American people to go back into slavery.
Didn't sound right to me. I felt compelled to look into it. Closest thing I found to anything validating such an accusation, a discussion about welfare changes 100 years after abolition.
That's not 100 years after slavery, the black community was doing better. We were going up, up, up. Then suddenly
importantly, they socialized our community via welfare policies, and the black community started going down, down, down.
Furthermore, to judge Owen's book by its cover, it seemed to clearly be indicating that slavery was not a good thing. So Bill Gates, FDA, whatever, it's another story. But the ends obviously justify the means for this shameless liar, all nonchalant like, oh yeah, didn't you know that? Yeah.
It's really important you find out the source of where that information came from, and then the people who are placing it on Facebook, just give them a bit of guidance and say, look, this is where your information came from. That's not a reputable source.
The genesis of many, not all, but many of these conspiracy theories are the alt-right. And the alt-right have their own interests and reasons for wanting to destabilise society and destabilise centralist governments.
So maybe through a diverse array of proxy agents, Bannon is out there trying to spread his influence. A lot of the people who call other people conspiracy theorists don't seem to have too much trouble believing in that one.
Experts say there's evidence extreme groups are tapping into causes like Māori rights movements.
The groups that have been targeted by this disinformation include some of our most vulnerable groups.
There is a much more active and organised group spreading some of that disinformation.
If you know someone who's gone down the rabbit hole of disinformation, then don't give up on them. Keep calling and checking in, especially in the afternoons and evenings.
I don't know this, but I think it could be seen as patronising or condescending, telling people if they have some out there unpopular opinion on something.
How do these people think they can inject our babies?
It must have been implanted into them by forces that Chris Hipkins says they can't comprehend.
One of the things I am very concerned about is that our Māori communities have been the target of a very active and organised misinformation campaign, some of which is being fuelled by white supremacists.
Here they go again, the young, the old and the angry. Wellingtonians angry right back.
Absolute idiots.
I do think people against unvaccinated people or against people opposed to mandates
I thought if I come along I can always throw myself in front of the pricks.
could maybe attempt to put themselves in the shoes of those who do have an objection for some reason. If they had been demonstrably disinformed or misinformed by the people who try to act like their friends, if they sometimes make predictions, everyone calls them crazy, then they turn out to actually have been onto something. Not always, but it does happen. Maybe all the conspiracies are wrong except for the Bannon one, and maybe I'm all part of it, cleverly ridiculing it to try and throw people off. Or maybe I'm part of it and I don't know that I'm part of it. My mind has been corrupted by subliminal messages in PlayStation games. Maybe sometimes people get it wrong. Maybe sometimes some people who look wrong actually are right. Maybe some people could be more tolerant of other opinions, even if they are absolutely sure of themselves, just in case they end up having not been 100% correct about whatever. My understanding is that throughout history, the majority of people have been wrong on occasion. Mostly not. Obviously, that's why life is so perfect now. Maybe I'm wrong.
Till next time, take care of yourself and each other.
No, I'm heading on to my next event.